Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Cathy Acratopulo, and she is the co-founder of an organization called Lace Partners, and she's a specialist in people strategy. I've got Cathy on the show to talk about managing the impact of the Great Resignation. So, Cathy, welcome along to the show. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure, Jason. Great to be here. Yeah, absolutely. Would you like me to give a quick overview of Lace Partners, maybe for your listeners?
Yeah, who you are, who
Yep.
Lace is, and a bit about your background in people strategy as well would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So Lace Partners, who are we? Right. We are a boutique HR transformation consultancy. So we help primarily HR directors with everything from building out their people strategy to looking at how have they got the HR function set up for success in terms of its operating model, to selecting and implementing HR systems, and right through to sort of the change and adoption practices that go through to your employees and line managers about embracing their people management responsibilities. So soup to nuts, HR transformation.
Very good. Very good. And what about you? What is your background in that, I imagine?
Yeah,
you started
absolutely.
a business around it.
Well, we started the business 7 years now. It's flown by, Jason. But essentially, my expertise and where I tend to focus with our clients is actually building out the people strategy. So from that point of view, really understanding what the business drivers are, what the business is trying to achieve over time, and what does that mean for the people outcomes that you need to deliver on, and how is the HR function best set up to achieve those outcomes? So it's very much that link between business goals and results through to the people aspect of the business and how you can deliver on that. So most of my time is spent interacting with chief people officers, with group HRDs, really trying to get under the skin of the challenges they're facing and help them shape what does that mean for their HR function, what do they really need to focus on, and how they actually organize themselves and build out an operating plan to deliver on those goals. So it's really interesting stuff. And I know the topic we're going to be talking today plays very well into that space in terms of the challenges that a lot of HRDs are facing right now.
It does. And of course, our audience is interested in all of that in context of data. And I'm not going to ask you to necessarily steer towards that, but the topic of people and culture and change and how that interacts with the HR function is critical to anything sort of anyone in the data and data strategy and sort of chief data officer space does. So I think certainly this topic around kind of how you set your organization up to be at the forefront of recruitment and keep hold of people and all these sorts of things that I can't wait to get onto, I think is super relevant. So brilliant to have you on the show. So we said we're going to talk about the impact of the Great Resignation, and it's one of those phrases that I'm not actually sure if loads of people know of it, but I know it's a kind of phrase that's come out over the last couple of years. I've read loads of stuff about certainly in the States, sort of just within like a 3-month period, 11.5 million people quit their jobs. There's surveys that suggest that half of the employed people are actively job hunting right now, and all these kind of things. People are leaving their jobs, moving into other things. You've got the move to working from home, all these kind of things that are impacting on people's views and opinions of how they want to work, what's attractive for them in terms of a job and the conditions that they work in, all this good stuff. So so important, particularly in data when it's so hot. But what I suppose, what is the Great Resignation for a start? And what's changed that's made it, people are always moving jobs, right? People joining, leaving jobs all the time. What's made it such a kind of big, kind of impactful thing right now?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. And it's something that we're seeing in sort of main broadsheet headlines as much as we are in the HR world. So it's and I'm sure from your your subscribers' perspective, it's a business challenge, right? And it's very much a data-led challenge as well to understand the trends and understand how best to respond. Look, if we look at it in its simplest terms, the challenge we have now, right now, in terms of people's reaction to post-COVID, if you like, there's a couple of moving parts that make this sort of a particularly pertinent issue. Data-wise, just to give you some stats, we know that there's been a Bloomberg survey in December, which was basically saying that 60% of managers are finding it harder to recruit now than they ever have done. The Office for National Statistics comes out regularly with updates on this, and they're saying now that resignation rates are the highest they've been for over 20 years.
Wow.
And if you think about, just in the UK, the period from July to September last year, there were 1 million movers. which is higher than normal anyway, but a third of those were resignations.
Right.
So it's that sort of unmanaged attrition, if you like, that organizations are facing, where individuals, for whatever reason, and we come on to those reasons, are choosing to make a move to do something different. Right.
Yes,
and that
and
different may be a complete pivot, right?
And this is separate from furlough and businesses having challenges. This is working people moving on to different jobs. And is this quite consistent across industries, or is there kind of any hotspots?
Really good question. And the latest stats from the Office for National Statistics does say that it's impacting particularly the lower skilled workforces in its numbers wise, but obviously there's quite a high volume of that workforce. But we can also see from some of the reactions that you'll see, maybe the larger scale businesses for more skilled workforces like the legal profession, there are huge wage battles going on right now to ensure that they can attract and retain quality, newly qualified lawyers, for example. So we can come on to some examples of what organizations are doing, but I do think it's worth considering what it is right now that's triggering that move. So in essence, Great Resignation rates are higher than they've ever been.
Right.
And therefore we have to dwell on why that is. So I think there are a couple of points to flag. One is that ultimately, we're on a strong economic bounce, right, coming out of the recession, of the sort of impact recession-wise for COVID. And we went into that very quickly, and we're coming out of it very quickly. So there is that bounce factor that we need to take into account. We've got a really tight labour market. So actually availability of talent is lower. We've got the impact of Brexit in terms of some jobs that we would typically have filled with our European counterparts. And actually, if you think about the nature of what's happened over the last 2 years with COVID, a lot of people have been stagnating, if you like, not making career choices, not making moves because of the uncertainty. Exactly. Staying where they were. Better the devil you know sometimes, Jason, right? So ultimately, there's been a sort of build up, if you like, of that lack of movement over the last couple of years. And now the market is buoyant.
A bit. Yeah.
Exactly. We're now in a position where people are actually then wanting to make a change. So there's a sort of catch-up mode here where people who were thinking of moving but have delayed the decision are now saying, you know what, the time has never been better. Now it's ripe to actually move on. So I think there's a number of factors driving it. And from your point around industry types, it is, we're seeing a lot of pain in that lower skilled workforce, but it actually is across all industries and at all levels.
Yeah. Was this happening anyway? Was there a shift? You've sort of given some good examples of how the pandemic sort of impacted it, but work was changing anyway, more online, more remote, more virtual, more digital. Was this something that was coming? And again, as the pandemic's been with many things, a catalyst for like driving it to happen that much quicker, or really was this genuinely a sort of response to the pandemic that sort of really made it happen?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has accelerated things, right? And if we just dwell on maybe that hybrid working aspect and working from home, that absolutely the pandemic has operated as a catalyst to really speed up the transition that workforces were maybe going through anyway. Maybe some were more resistant than others. And actually what's happened by the very nature of how we've had to operate, and let's also reflect on the fact that not everyone has been able to work from home, right? There are key workforces that's not relevant to, but where it is viable, organizations have almost been forced into that at a pace that is far greater than they will have experienced previously. And therefore you're now in this position where there is an expectation amongst the workforce that actually flexible working of some kind is now almost a right, and requesting flexible work practices has always been a right, well, not always, but certainly recently in terms of the changes in labour law. But now we're in a position where more and more people have that expectation. It becomes almost a hygiene factor in a job. So actually that shift has happened at a far greater pace than ever would have done without the pandemic. And now we're in a position where we've got, latest statistics around 2 out of 5 people saying they never want to go back to the office in the UK. We've got a sixth of people saying that they're willing to quit their jobs if they can't work from home. So there is a significant appetite, but also an expectation that should be the norm far more than ever.
Yeah. It's it's interesting, isn't it? Because the almost before, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, even the situation at an organization, the HR policies they had, the ways of working they had were kind of almost employer driven. It was, this is how it works working here. If you want to work here, cool. And you're good for us, cool. Come and have a job. It's the power shifting. This is, or lots of this is about kind of the employee going, no, I want something different to what you offer. I'm going to go and get that somewhere else because they offer it. Or I'd like to work in this way. I need you, and in the same way that almost consumer power has shifted to the consumer rather than with the, service provider, the retailer or whatever. Is the same happening here? Is that what's driving it?
Yeah, there has been an absolute power shift for those reasons that we outlined, Jason, right? In terms of, the bounce back of the economy, the lack of available people with the right skills, that build up of people wanting to move on but not and choosing not to. So actually that has dramatically, from a pure sort of supply and demand perspective, created a power shift. And that power shift is on a number of factors. As an employee now, you hold the cards at the moment in terms of your choice of what you do for your job going forward. So the demands are changing both in terms of that convenience factor, making, I want my job to be as convenient to me as possible. So that flexible working, hybrid working, as we've already touched on, is changing in terms of the power shift around salary levels. So like I said earlier, US law firms now are paying, I think it's in the region of 150K for a newly qualified recruit, which is significantly more than their UK counterparts are paying. They're also offering e-cars and all sorts of other benefits that sort of are very much playing on that competitive landscape for talent. But also, linked to that, there's also, from an employee point of view, they're weighing up the pros and cons of different benefits as well. And there's some creativity in the employment space around what benefits to offer to appeal to the type of individuals that may be relevant to your roles. And also individuals now, I think, are paying far more attention to the culture that they'll be joining and actually making a choice with their feet around actually how I've been treated over the last 2 years by my employer. Is that has the organization now shown its true colors? Is it somewhere I really want to spend my next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years? Actually, do I feel now the opportunity is ripe? Am I making that choice now to join an organization that I maybe feel that is more aligned to my value set, or is an organization that I think has treated its employees better than my employer over the last 2 years? So I think there's numerous factors that are choice factors, if you like, and the power shift around organizations now being under pressure to shift the dial on all of those factors, not just salary, I think has never been greater.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because you mentioned there obviously about salary, but there's so many other things. I think that people want out of work, and when you talk about being based at home, all of a sudden culture actually becomes almost more important. It's not just being at home; that you still people want to be part of something, want to be progressing towards something. So culture sort of plays a more important part, and the roots and branches of that culture need to reach further than just kind of the four walls of the the floor you're on in the office. So are we seeing a change in what you talked about salaries increasing and the benefits packages sort of almost increasing, but is there a situation where people kind of more interested in what the kind of overarching package of employment, I suppose, looks like, rather than it just being about, I'm going to go for the best salary? I actually want the best work situation and work environment than I do salary, or actually we're just seeing everything going up?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of the above, to be honest, Jason. So we are seeing some salary changes. We know that salaries are rising at a significant rate. The Pret index is one that's often quoted, the Pret-a-Manger index, not just in terms of knowing how active cities are by how many Prets are open and what their revenue is, but also in the last 4 months alone, Pret have increased their salary levels twice. Wow. So that gives you an indication of the nature of competition out there for individuals, and in those sorts of hospitality and retail type jobs, the salary is a key factor when people are looking to make their decisions. But the choice is wider than that. And I think the challenge that organizations now have is that over the last couple of years, not only has the pandemic accelerated the working from home shift, it's also accelerated a change in value sets, I think, in the employee base. So I think people now have a very different view of what they see as of most value to them as an individual. And therefore, they're weighing up the offer or the proposition that's being currently offered to them by their current employer, and comparing that to what they think is available in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So that shift on numerous fronts is what's changing. And I think you're absolutely right. That because of that value shift change, people now are looking a little bit more holistically about what's on offer from their employer. So, for example, as you say, the benefits package, individuals now actually may actually want more of an employee assistance package from their employer. They may want to know what the offer is around well-being, in the circumstances of actually appreciating now the care that comes from their employer. And if your employer's benefits package doesn't necessarily reflect that caring attitude and that broader view of the whole self, not just the individual as a worker, then that may count against you as an employer as well. So I think it's a really pertinent time for organizations as business leaders, not just as HR leaders, to reflect on what I would call in the HR world your employee value proposition, so your EVP. What is the deal that you're offering right now? And if it hasn't shifted apart from salary over the last even 6 months, let alone the last 2 years of the pandemic, then I would challenge you to say it needs to shift. Because unless you are reacting to that change in value sets, you will be left behind and face significant challenge, both attracting but also retaining your current workforce going forward.
That's the thing is, I mean, the Great Resignations, it's two sides, isn't it? There's people are leaving, therefore that's a retention challenge for the people for the organizations where people are leaving, and then there's, well, what do we do with the people that are leaving? There's organizations that are trying to attract them. So that employee value proposition you talk about there, it's both in order to sort of make sure you can attract the kind of people that you want to work for your organization, and then once they're there, it's strong enough internally to kind of make sure that they have that lasting sort of impact on the business. Just the sort of, I wouldn't mind understanding that employee value proposition a little bit more. Is that, obviously there's salary and there's benefits, but it's more, it's, the language suggests it's more than just, what you pay people and what you give them. There's this kind of like, what's it like to be here, I imagine, as well.
Exactly. And if you think about when you've applied for jobs previously, right, if we all put ourselves back in that position of being a candidate, a job hunter, when we look at what's available in the marketplace, yes, we look at salary, of course we do. But I think increasingly those candidates are looking at what it would feel like to work there. What sort of support would I be given to develop my career? What are my opportunities to progress in the organization? How would I be looked after? And I think that's become an increasing value set, right, in terms of how would I be looked after, the well-being approach within the organization. What about different stages of my life and the support I would get as I progress in the organization? What about, the people manager will be managing me? We know that someone's a big driver of whether someone loves their job or not is how they're being managed directly by the one up, if you like, in terms of their line manager. So all of the factors around, what you look for in a job, the better an employer can make that as tangible as possible and a clearly articulated proposition, the more likely they are to attract, firstly, the right people across the sort of entry sign, if you like, because ultimately, if you're being more explicit about what the deal is and what life will be like, then you should get a better fit of candidates. But also then once people are in, assuming that proposition that you're setting out does reflect the reality.
It's got to live up to that expectation.
Exactly. Then as long as you do live up to that reality, then people will be engaged. And if, I have a simple equation that I look at, which is in this circumstances, if you think about your EVP as being the offer, the deal, then when you join an organization, assuming this is for candidates, right, you look at the EVP and say, is that what I want from my employer? That sets expectations, right? I'm now entering on day one, expecting that to be the deal, the reality. The experience, or the EX, the employee experience that I get once I'm in the organization, is the reality. So then I do the computation, right, of how does my experience compare with what I believed was the deal. If that results in a positive, i.e. it's as good as or better than I thought it would be, then engagement levels are positive, right, and go up. And we know there's a direct link. I think no one really disputes anymore that the direct link between engagement levels and productivity. So we know that will impact business performance. If, however, I join and what I've been sold at interview or sold in the job advert or told by the agent that I went through doesn't stack up, and my reality is not as good as what was set out at the beginning, then my engagement levels are going to drop, as will my productivity, and I become a retention risk. So there is real power in ensuring that your EVP is as tangible and realistic as possible. So that getting that right is important. And actually, if you're running a business and you look at your job ads that are going out as a business leader, you need to challenge yourself as how realistic is that? How much of that is brand? I'm setting out what I aspire to be as an organization, and how much of it is real. Getting it real, as well as being inspiring, but not aspirational, i.e. it's not real yet, is really important.
And so you sort of look at job specs and they tend not to cover any of this, right? It's sort of very functional around what you need to be able to do and some of your experience, but that kind of almost that sales pitch, if you like, that goes out there, and that's beyond just when you're recruiting, isn't it? That there's a kind of brand, your brand as it exists for customers also exists for potential employees. So I think there's that kind of ongoing look at, as a brand, are you representing the way you want to be represented in the market, and is that an attractive enough brand that people want to kind of hang out with and work for potentially. But I think that bit about how much does it live up to that internally, I think is so important. And they're almost different parts of the organization sometimes have responsibility for making that true or not.
Absolutely.
Is there a different way of working then organizations need to have to? Because I think if I take a step back, actually, I think what you're saying there is there's a moment now to take a bit of a step back, reflect on whether you've got a strong EVP, a new acronym I've just learned, employee value proposition, and if you haven't, tweak it. If you have, make it. Do you know what I mean? So sort of have a review and make it better. How do people need to think about how they organize themselves then? Is this a totally different way of thinking? Is this really just go back to sort of basics of what HR is all about and people management's all about, or is there something fundamentally different about what organizations need to do and how they need to think and how they need to set themselves up in order to get this right?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to consider. Ultimately, back to your point that you were just making then as well about whose responsibility is this? How do you set yourself up to do this well? I don't think we're shifting the responsibilities here. Ultimately, in an organization, when a candidate joins, or for your existing employees, the majority of their experience will be down to whoever is managing them. And yes, it will be the policies and practices that are in place around promotion and career development and learning and support when you need it as an individual. And that is dictated by your policies, which are created by HR, right? They own those policy sets, but they're informed and created with the business rather than HR doing that in a silo. But actually, therefore, the role of leadership, business leadership and business managers is so critical in this, because that is what really drives an individual's experience of working for an organization. You can have all the best policies in the world and all the best benefits in the world, but if that's not actually brought home as a sort of a key part of someone's experience of working with their line manager, if they're not being encouraged to grow and develop in line with what the value proposition would say what they should be expecting, if they're not being given opportunities to develop, or if they're not being supported as an individual when things aren't going right for them, maybe in their personal life or in other aspects of their job, then that actually, that HR can't actually influence that beyond having the right policies and practices in place. The reality of who drives that. Exactly. And the culture is just behaviors, right? And the behaviors are epitomized by the people around you in your job. And I doubt very much that it's your HR business partner who's the person having those conversations with you in these circumstances. It'll be your direct line manager and the leader of your business area and their leader, right? So there is a whole piece here around leadership and culture. However, HR does have a critical role in making sure that what is on offer does align to the organizational brand and also the value or sets of the employees or candidates coming in. So, I can talk you through how you would go about how, the steps involved, I guess, of sense checking whether what you've got now is relevant or not, because I think that part is where the data piece, bringing this back to data, is so critical.
Yeah, is there data that organizations can use? And there's obviously the macro metrics, I suppose, the information, some of which you shared, the metrics about, resignation rates and attrition and all those sorts of things. Is there, so yeah, what does that data set look like? Is it just those sort of external factors? Is there some internal things that people can look at to help better inform either the case for change or the changes that are actually made?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. There are some macro main data points, right, that you would look at, and most organizations are looking at these all the time anyway. So things like attrition levels, unmanaged attrition, people leaving without your the intent of them leaving, are a key part of that. Externally in the market, what's happening with your competitors, the propositions that they're putting forward, what's happening in the labor market. These are all relevant data points. I think that the piece that's shifted in the last year or two, that we need to get better at understanding, is more around that engagement data. So actually, as an organization, do you have an effective way of measuring engagement? How frequently are you measuring engagement? Is it the more traditional once a year, let's run a survey, take few months to analyze it, then maybe do some action planning, and before we know it, it's time for the survey again, and it becomes this sort of cycle of activity? Or actually, are you able to really tap into the pulse of the workforce in much more timely ways that enable you to course correct far more quickly, rather than maybe doing an annual analysis and maybe some knee-jerk reactions at the time of what came out as hot from that survey data point at the time, rather than, as I say, being able to make nuanced changes along the way, and maybe do some pulse surveys that give you instant feedback on specific topics like hybrid working, for example. So I think that there are some data points in there that I personally feel we can do more to really understand that better, because actually, if you think about the pace of change that we're going through right now in terms of value sets changing, the need to revisit your EVP, this is way beyond, to me, this is an exercise that needs to go way beyond what you would normally do to assess and track and respond to engagement data. This to me is a sort of a far deeper, much more thorough review that needs to happen right now to address the talent attraction and talent retention challenges that organizations are absolutely facing.
So there's kind of your always on, maybe once a year, maybe pulse, maybe the combination of those two, which is really kind of the underlying trend you're getting there. You might get some things that pop out of that goes, wow, we didn't realize we had a challenge here, but really that's looking over time. Are we getting better or worse, or consistently scoring? But actually, I think you're saying there's a given the broader problem, whether it's the Great Resignation or not, but the broader challenge of attracting, the competition around attracting and then retaining talent. There's a sort of deep dive in what's needed to retain the kind of people that you want, but also, I guess, and this is where from some more external, I think, is it to retain people? It's really about what your current employees are saying, essentially, but the attraction is as much about what are other people saying. Normally comparing yourself against others isn't the best thing to do, but it feels like here there's knowing what you're up against, knowing who else is trying to attract attention actually can help you bring out some sort of unique points about what your value proposition is all about.
Exactly.
So is that kind of split about right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think, so let's think about current workforce right now, and then come on to maybe the marketplace and the talent attraction piece. If we think about, making sure that you, and this is back to your point, this is in addition to what you would do on a cyclical basis, no matter how frequent that is. I think there needs to be a short, sharp period of active listening within the organization. And you may have the channels available to you to do that now. If you've got a really strong sort of survey methodology or pulse technique that you can use, you may not, right? This may be actually where you need to instigate some more listening channels to give you the information. But I think a short, sharp period of active listening, because there has been a shift in value sets, and this is that it's been accelerated, catalyzed by the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's getting to grips with exactly what people are feeling right now, and accepting that they may be feeling differently in a month or 2 or 3 months' time. And this is changing so quickly. Right. So having the right channels in place to do that, and as I say, that may be survey based, it may be focus group based, it may be having representative groups of different workforces within your organization in place. But getting the data around what people value most about working for your organization right now, how the current proposition stacks up, what they think is, of where their value set is right now, looking at the proposition that's currently available, what of that aligns, what do they value most, what is it actually that they feel is less relevant now, and what would they like to see change. Now, that to me is a sort of active listening exercise that will drive some incredibly insightful data points. The challenge with asking those questions is that you need to be going into that accepting as a leadership team that you will need to change. And that yes. change may require investment. Okay, so you can't go into these things without accepting that you need to react quickly to the response, and potentially
fingers crossed everyone's happy and you don't need to change it.
Well, exactly. So don't ask the question unless you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, frankly, in terms of then doing something differently. Doesn't mean that the overall cost may need to change. It may be about rebalancing the proposition, but actually being ready to take action off the back of that. So that active listening exercise needs to be undertaken, and if it's not happening in people who are listening to this now, if that's not happening in their organization, I would challenge them to say, why isn't it happening? Because unless, most of us are feeling the pinch in terms of bringing in good people and retaining good people. So why wouldn't you want to enter into some form of dialogue that gives you the information you need to enable you to take stock and to say, actually, are we being as compelling as we could be? Where do people want things to change, and are we ready to make those changes? So internally, I think that's important. And the other additional point I would make is that in that environment, it would also be good to really segment your workforce rather than doing everyone at the same time in terms of the same approach. Looking at the segments, what are your critical jobs right now for your success as a business? And do you absolutely understand what the top talent that you've got in those critical jobs really wants from you as an employer right now? And that's particularly important where you've got quite a diversified set of workforces in your business. Maybe you've got some clear sales channels, maybe you've got different product sets, maybe you're in different geographies. But taking that segmentation approach and looking at the data on a segmented basis is really important, because then you also then need to understand what's the proposition that's out there for those individuals in those workforce segments. And that might, as I say, be workforce type or geography, for example. And how do we compare?
I mean, one of the things you said through that is what people value is changing. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things here, isn't it? Because we, as humans, we're only just probably still 2 years in working out what we value. And you have those moments where it's like, that's what really gets me out of bed. Those are the kind of things that are really important to me. And that is different between different life stages. What's going on at home? Do you have kids? Are you supporting someone in care? There's all these kind of things that impact on what you value at any point in time. So this kind of this movable feast almost must be quite tricky to wrap your arms around. But as you say, you've got to try and get to the nub of it.
Well, look, if we don't ask, we won't know, will we? So it's sort of thing, I think we know personally, right, our value sets have changed.
Yes.
So everyone will be
assume others
the same way that we are, right? What we look for now is probably different, and our expectations are probably different to where they were 2 years ago, even 6 months ago, right? And I think therefore the point is that unless you ask, you don't know. And having therefore some way of doing that in a reliable way gives you quantitative as well as qualitative data that you can then make informed decisions on is so important rather than second guessing. And this is the challenge we have when you see maybe your competitors or other organizations in the marketplace coming back to that talent attraction piece as opposed to your existing workforce. It's so tempting to just copy or match or have a knee-jerk reaction to what they're doing. So if we come back to that US law firm scenario that I put forward at the beginning, offering significant salary hikes for new entry lawyers and newly qualified lawyers. Now, that's great. That may well up your talent attraction capability in the very short term. So it may well be that people go and follow the money. But in reality, when they work for those US legal firms, maybe the broader proposition around working hours, the environment they're working in, what they're expected to do, how much they feel valued or looked after, the career progression opportunities, the things that we value over our longer term careers may well not stack up. So whilst you may, by a knee-jerk reaction of trying to match those salaries, be able to say, we're just as competitive right now to get people through the door.
Yeah.
In 6 months, 12 months, 18 months time, I can say with some confidence that unless the broader proposition stacks up and feels as good as maybe the other options that were available to them for non-US law firms, you actually may find you then have an attrition problem within that circumstance, because people will take the money, thank you very much, but actually if those longer term values aren't delivered on, then you're building
yourself a different problem.
Exactly. Right? You know, it will come out in the wash at some point. So taking a more holistic view, but you only really know what's going to be most value to people by asking the question. And the challenge is getting that from candidates, right, as opposed to your employee set.
That's true, yes, but you're not going to find me arguing with you about having a data guided approach to making these decisions. So I'm fully on board. It's been great talking, Cathy. The sort of last sort of thought really is where does this go? You know, in terms of the Great Resignation, is this a short-term thing now? Do you think, you know, lots of change has happened, and it's sort of the change is now there? Great Resignation is happening. You know, is this going to continue? Will we see it peter off? You know, what's the mood in the world on whether this is really just, it's going to happen? There's a big, you know, sandbagging, as we called it before. It's going to happen. People are going to move jobs, and then we're going to move on. Or is this now the normal way of people sort of moving around and being much more flexible with the roles that they do?
Okay, so, you know, right now, I think anyone who makes firm predictions for the future is probably setting themselves up to fail.
Granted,
but I'll give you my views. Okay, I think that to me, I think there has been a build-up, right? There's been a backlog of change happening. And so I do expect it to calm down. However, I don't necessarily expect there to be a dramatic shift again in value sets to what they used to be, right? So I expect the appetite for more of a holistic well-being approach from organizations, the appetite for hybrid working, the appetite to have a more balanced view of the deal, if you like, the proposition, will continue. What I suspect will calm down is just the sheer nature, the volume of the change. You know, when you look at the numbers themselves, you know, the original Great Resignation piece was very much built around people pivoting and moving to different things that reflected a change in how they wanted to spend their time, right? I think actually the reality is showing that people aren't pivoting as much as they thought they were. And what they're actually doing is shifting employers in the same industry. And that's where the competition kicks in, and the tendency to have a knee-jerk reaction to responding to keeping up with the Joneses, if you like, in terms of your salary levels and so on. So I expect that to calm down over time. But I do not expect this demand for a more holistic approach to seeing the individual as a person and taking a very much more a broader approach to what the proposition is and being able to articulate that clearly. I don't see that changing. So I think organizations investing in that approach and methodology now is time well spent. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, yes, thank you for your prediction. Sorry for putting me on the spot with that. All fascinating stuff. I think, as you say, this is going to run even if it's not off the back of or needing to deal with a Great Resignation. I think, you know, the value proposition you have as an organization, I think, always remains pretty front and center. And I think but the power shift from employer to employee is one of the massive sort of game changers in that. So, Cathy, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been great talking to you. Really enjoyed it.
Really enjoyed it too. Thanks a lot, Jason.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you again next time.